Hi there, it's Bronwyn. Welcome back to Before Dieting. Before we begin today's episode, I want to let you know that I'm taking a short 2-week break. And rather than leave you without an episode, I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to revisit two of the most important conversations we've had on the podcast. And those conversations were about food access and food agency. Because these two ideas sit right at the beginning of the Waiting for Happiness approach, because they help explain that long before the diets and the calories and the weight loss, we were learning about food. And in our childhood meal times, we were learning exactly how much food autonomy we had. And of course, those early experiences became the foundation of the eating blueprint that we carry into our adult lives. So I hope you enjoyed listening, whether it's the first time round or whether you're hearing them again with fresh ears. Thank you as always for being here and for being part of the growing Waiting for Happiness community. Have a wonderful couple of weeks, take care of yourself, and I'll be back with brand new episodes in 2 weeks. Over the last month, we've had a lot of new listeners join the podcast, so thanks for that and welcome. But what it tells me is that some of the earlier foundational episodes, the ones that explain where eating systems start, may not have been heard yet. So instead of moving straight on, I'm going back and repeating 2 key episodes that speak directly to food autonomy in childhood. Even if you've heard them before, a lot of what I talk about later will make more sense with these pieces in place. Because for women with a weight regain pattern, this is where eating systems start to form. Childhood food access and agency really do set the blueprint for your relationship with food and how you eat. So in today's episode on access, this is about whether food was available, when it was available, and under what conditions you were allowed to have it. It can probably be summed up in a simple question. Could you get access to food when you needed it or wanted it? If any questions come up as you're listening, you can send them to me at hello@waitingforhappiness.com.au. So keep listening and let's go into food access. Welcome back to Before Dieting. In today's episode, I want to talk with you about another topic that weight loss conversations never touch on, and that's the amount of food autonomy that you had in childhood. What you learned about food in childhood doesn't just become a memory, it becomes an eating blueprint. Think about it like a lifelong set of rules and responses that determine how you eat, particularly when you're under pressure and especially when no one's watching. I break food autonomy up into 2 parts. First of all, access, which we'll talk about this week, and this describes the autonomy or agency you had to obtain food outside your 3 daily meals. And then next week, we'll look at the other half, which is agency. And this describes what authority that you had at the family dinner table over what you ate and how much. And even though we're splitting it into 2 weeks, it's good to think about these 2 episodes as 2 sides of the same coin, because access and agency make up the largest portion of the architecture of your eating system. And once you can see them clearly, change becomes possible without relying on the good old willpower to hold everything together. All right, let's set the scene and acknowledge that everywhere you turn, there is information that tells you in a multitude of ways that to lose weight, you need to cut calories. How you cut the calories is everybody's individual thing. And we want to acknowledge that that information of cutting calories is valid. You do need to know what and how much you're consuming. The problem is that that information is incomplete. It tries to fix the result of the eating system, which is the body fat, without investigating and knowing the system that produced it. And that eating system wasn't built at the time that you started gaining weight. It was built in childhood, created from family meals by what was allowed and what wasn't. What I'm going to say next is something that might be hard to hear, that if you've spent decades trying to lose weight and keep it off, there will be a long gap between cause and effect, often decades. That means what's determining your eating today will have been learned long before you had any adult awareness of it. But it is crucial to close the gap between this cause and effect so you don't stay stuck in that dieting loop. So let's put thinking about diets on hold for a moment, and let me recap on these 2 definitions I mentioned at the beginning. Access describes the autonomy you had to get food outside of regular hours. This could be things like having an afternoon snack. Agency, on the other hand, describes the authority that you had at mealtimes when you're sitting down eating those 3 meals a day. It describes how much choice you had over what foods were put on your plate and the quantities that you were served. What I want you to also notice in these definitions is what they don't include. They don't include any moral judgment. They don't include whether your eating was good or bad. And they certainly don't include anything about body size, because these would be diet topics, not eating system topics. And access and agency are in the architecture of your eating system. Your body weight is either the byproduct, the output, or the side effect of your eating system. Most women don't think about childhood eating unless they're prompted. And when they are asked, they might say things like, well, it was pretty normal, or my mother was a bad cook, or my parents did their best, and all of which may be true. But what's usually missing is that the impact of childhood eating experiences is not obvious. Because let's face it, children don't interpret rules as, I'm eating this way and it's going to shape my metabolism. Children interpret rules as, this is how things work. This is what's allowed. This is what's safe. Then they grow up and they don't even remember learning those rules, but yet they still live by them. And that's what the disconnect is. It's not that you forgot your childhood. It's that you didn't know you had to make the connections between then and now. So let's talk about what restricted access to food teaches your nervous system. If you had limited access to food, whether that be factually correct or not, if you thought you had limited access to food, it doesn't just shape what you ate. It shapes how your eating system responds to abundance and scarcity today. If food for you was restricted or rationed or required permission for everything, your answer to that may have been, when food's available, eat it, and when nobody's watching, take it. Because hunger in childhood isn't something abstract. It's physical, it's uncomfortable, and it can make a child feel desperate. So let's speak plainly. What does a child do in these circumstances? Well, it can lead to the behaviours of sneaking and stealing food, creating maybe food stashes so you've got something to come back to, eating things alone, eating fast, and particularly hiding the evidence. And I want to say this carefully. If you did any of those things as a child or are doing them now, don't let shame overtake you. These are not shameful behaviours. They are purposeful, practical ways of meeting your needs. And you need to know that many, many women did the same thing. Yet the insight most women have never been given is that when you have restricted access to food in childhood, it creates an eating blueprint that follows you into adulthood. And the reason we don't make the connections back to childhood is because there can be a 20, 30, or 40-year gap between what created the eating blueprint and the resulting excess weight you're trying to get rid of today. So instead of letting your critical voices take over with their usual judgments that sound like, I'm hopeless, I have no willpower, or I can't stick to anything, there are two reframes I want you to think about. One is to think about these eating behaviours as a type of self-care, ones that you learnt to do under difficult circumstances. And the second one is to think about these types of secret eating as a survival strategy. So let me leave you with two investigative questions to help you dig deeper into the access to food you had as a child. The first one is, could you take food from the pantry or fridge without permission? Because that's really about a trust issue. And the second one is, how did you solve hunger between meals? And if you're ready to eliminate shame and go deep into your full food story, check out the Waiting for Happiness program. Because getting to the root cause of your weight gain is why I created the Waiting for Happiness project. If you're learning something useful in the Before Dieting podcast, please help other women find it by giving it a rating or leaving a comment. When you do, it really does help. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk with you next week in the episode on childhood food agency.